Well, hello and welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. This is Jamie.
And I'm Malin.
And we're back for another riveting episode of Season 2. I found a new word.
You did. I love it. I love it. I'm excited about your new word, Jamie. Riveting.
Oh, well, yeah, but you can't use the word exciting because I'm just going to download it and it's going to be the word again. So just stop. Anyway. So I have to tell you, it has finally shifted. The weather here is now cool and fall-like, and the leaves are starting to change. And you're probably not listening to this right now, like we're recording it right now. But oh my goodness, it's finally fall because it's been so hot.
It's funny that you say that because I'm sitting here and it's near, I think it's almost 85 degrees here today.
Oh,
so it's so funny that you say, oh, it's fall-like, it's cool. I'm like, well, it was. It's not now, but this is probably one of the warmest Octobers I remember ever going through, I think. One of at least the top 10.
It's been kind of crazy. We were out, we were planning on going to a football game a week ago. And I was like, oh, this is the perfect football game weather. Because normally by this time, football, I'm like, no, thanks. I'm good. I don't need to sit in the bleachers and freeze my tush off for high school kids I don't know. But that night would have been perfect. And then we weren't able to go. But yes, I'm super excited. And I was also thinking about our episodes last year in the spooky season. And so I think I'm going to go drive around and look at some decorations and see if we have any Halloween fanatics like we did last year.
Yeah, so we tried to go and do a pumpkin patch today, actually, after church. And it was a no-go because it was so hot. Like we were dying. One of the people that went with us only had a sweatshirt and they were trying to really tough it out, but they couldn't. And then it was literally the sun is just beating down at us. We're like, okay. It's not that it's excessively hot because we've had hotter. It's just October for a hayrack ride to go pick out a pumpkin. You do not want it to be 85 degrees and bright sunny.
Do you want some cider? No, thank you.
There was nobody at the cider line and there was everybody at lemonade stands. So it's like, okay.
Right. Oh, well.
And before we get going on this, I wanted to talk to you really quick. And maybe this can be a future episode or not. I don't know. But something happened, I'd say from the last time we talked with, I'll call him a family friend. And they have a child that is, off in college. And they were coming back and they were bringing their boyfriend, girlfriend back for the first time. And I was talking with the dad and, they were talking about this is the first time they've had to even entertain the thought that they could be blending their family, right? Like this could be the moment that, their son or daughter picks this new person and now they're off and running. And it was so funny because I was talking to this gentleman with myself removed, right? Like, oh yeah, that's, that would be tough. I can only imagine, blah, blah. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute, I have a kid that's in college. So then it was almost like an eye-opening experience for me to be like, I could be this gentleman and who knows when, right? I could be thinking about the same thing he's thinking about. And it made me want to go, am I prepared? And
by
ask
Christmas,
the question.
Malin.
No, I'm not. No, I rebuke that. That's not by Christmas.
Rebuke that.
But the question came up is, how to blend a family. And I've never had to think about that before. I've never had to think about what do I have to do as my family expands. I always kind of had in the back of my mind, my family would be expanding. But then to think about that conceptually and see it at your doorstep, I don't think I'm ready for that. And so I went from almost pitying this gentleman to thinking, oh my goodness, I could be this guy. And what do I do if I'm this guy? And what happens when that
by
comes
Christmas?
Up? Not by Christmas, Jamie. So
I'm just kidding.
I wanted just to kind of bring that here because I thought, well, that's such an interesting concept and idea that, again, I always looked at it from the outside, looking towards that for other people. And now it's real enough in my life that could become my scenario. And it's kind of scary as the dad. I'm going to just be honest. Like, it's just scary.
Well, something you said kind of stuck with me. You said, I've never had to think about it before. And that's not true. Because you had to think about it as you and your wife came together and had to figure out holidays with family and all of those things. So, I mean, I get it's a totally different it's a new phase in that, but you've thought about that before.
Well, but I've thought about it in a way that it didn't matter what other people thought. It didn't matter what my parents thought. It didn't matter what their parents. It just mattered what I thought. And this is the first
Other
time I have
people's
to.
feelings were being hurt, not mine. This is
Well,
a big difference.
and that was a younger version of me, and also that was, well, that's
No,
too
that's
bad for them. They'll have to get over it. And now it's like I have to give myself the same medicine. Like, get over it. It's going to happen. All I'm saying is I was not ready for me to even think about that term or that idea, and now it's lodged in my brain. So I'm like, great. So I wanted to share that with you because I'm like, have we ever actually sat down and thought about that? That time in your life when, as a child, you're expanding. You found the one, and you're going to settle down. But then, what does that look like from the parents' point of view? And I have not ever thought about that. And I've never had to, right? I've never been in this situation.
It's funny that you say that because I did have a couple of Christmases here recently and Thanksgivings and other stuff where we either had to adjust our family time together to a different time or do it a different day or just be without one of my kiddos for one of those holidays or two. So it's a tough space. And what's interesting is that now that you say that, we're kind of you totally segued into our guest because that is kind of what we're talking about today is families and blending and all kinds of, it touches on this subject too. So I want to introduce our guest today. Her name is Lisa. Lisa and I have known each other, I don't even know how long, but I'm really excited to bring you on. We're going to talk a little bit. This subject is it's really near to me and touches my life a lot. We're going to talk a little bit about adoption. And some of the difficult conversations that come around adoption. So, Lisa, my friend, is here to join us for this conversation. And I would love for you to just take a minute and introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hello, I am Lisa. To segue into adoption, I got pregnant at 17. I was still in high school. I married the father and I raised a child. And we got divorced. I was a single mom for about 10 years. And then I met my current husband. And when I was 39 years old, I found out I was pregnant again. And I just didn't have the support around me. And a little bit, I didn't want to start all over raising a child at 40 years old. Being a young mom, I just didn't want 21 years between my kids, but it was happening. So early on in my pregnancy, I knew I was going to choose adoption. And that was the only option for me in my mind. And so I contacted an agency and started this journey called being a first mom, a natural mom, a birth mom.
Yeah. First mom. I like that one. Well, I want to thank you for coming on. I know this is a tough topic. And you and I kind of talked about that before we even started today. It can be a difficult subject. It can be, there's lots of feelings wrapped up in all of it. And so I would love to just pick your brain a little bit about, you talked about not having the support around or feeling like you didn't have the support and weren't wanting to parent a second time. How did your adoption, I guess, how did that take place? Were you able to pick the family? I mean, we have very different experiences in adoption, right? I did my adoptions through foster care. You intentionally placed with a family. Were you able to pick the family, or how does that all work for you?
Through the agency, they asked me what I was looking for in a family, and then they presented me profiles that kind of fit what I was looking for. And I think I came home with like 12 profiles and then narrowed it down to one. I wanted to interview two families, but the agency clutched their pearls and said, oh my gosh, if two families get excited and you only pick the one, the other family's going to be heartbroken. It would have gave me more peace of mind if I could have interviewed the family. But I did choose one that I thought resembled what I wanted for my child. And then in the state I'm in at that time, open adoption agreements were not legal. We did talk about what contact would look like, but even in open adoption agreements, it's not it's legally enforceable, but not legally enforceably, because if there's a conflict, then it goes to mediation, and the judge decides if you have to take it to court, how to rule. But since I had parented before, I wanted to see my child once a month for the first year, and then 2 or 3 times until she was 18. And that's not how it turned out.
I was going to ask that. Is that how it worked? How has that played out? I guess I knew that there was not a lot of legality around an open adoption agreement. I didn't even know there was an open adoption agreement other than whatever the families decided on. Has that changed in our state? I'm so out of it now, like away from that world, I guess. But is that something that's different now?
Approximately 2017, our state passed an legally enforceable open adoption agreement. I placed, obviously, 8 years before that, so it did not include me. I placed her, and then I got to see her when she was a month old. When she was 2 months old, the parents decided that they were too busy. I didn't get to see her. And then the following 10 months, I was able to see her. They lived approximately 3 hours away. It was up to me to drive to them. It was horrible.
Yeah.
We would meet in restaurants, and so all the pictures that I took had other people, strangers in the background. When she would cry, her mom wanted to take her back. It was uncomfortable. I was finally able to see her at her house a couple of times. And then her first birthday, they let me have a birthday party at my brother's house that lives very near them. And after the birthday party, I didn't know when I was going to see her again. And that was hard to do. My adult daughter was with me, and she was upset because she didn't know when she was going to see her sister again. And the adoptive mom got really pissed off at me because I didn't, quote unquote, side with them. Like, of course you're going to see her again. Why are you upset? And I explained that it's not going to be next month. It's up to you guys now when that 2 to 3 times a year is going to happen. But they did honor the 2 or 3 times a year, but even though I was supposed to be invited to important events, I was not invited to her baptism. I was told that was just for family. And then the adoptive family has a brother that, quote unquote, does not understand adoption. So I was never allowed to see her when there was any extended family around. And I'm like, well, it's kind of your job to explain adoption to your family. I mean, this child is going to grow up in this family. You can't have people uncomfortable and not asking questions about it. And then slowly 3 visits turned to 2 visits a year, and COVID hit. And I have not seen my child since 2021. And right now, it doesn't appear that the adoptive parents are going to let me see her. As long as they have the decision, they're not going to let me see her. And I asked myself, what went wrong? And I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I have some questions. Lisa, again, we just met, and I understand that this is very personal, and I understand that this is this isn't a very emotional conversation for you, so I want to be as respectful as I can. Some of the questions that I have is around the adoption itself. I know of, and again, I am not in the adoption world. I've never adopted a child. I have only seen things on television or have friends or family who have done some sort of adoption, but again, nothing that I'm directly involved with. But one of the questions that come to my mind is, when you decide if it's an open adoption or a closed adoption, can you help me understand, is that up to the couple that's adopting the child, or is that something that the birth mother can kind of, I don't want to say regulate, but maybe I do, decide on what kind of adoption this is for a child?
The agency I placed through only does open adoptions, and that's because science and research has shown that having the first family involved is helpful to the adoptee. A closed adoption means I wouldn't have known any details other than maybe first names, and any communication would be through the agency. Semi-open adoption, would be, we communicate through the agency. I send pictures to the agency. They send them on to the family. Family communicates to the agency. It is up to the first mom. There's some first moms that just don't think they can handle it. They don't want contact. But this agency that I placed through would have called it an open adoption, but just left it up to the natural mom to lead the way, leave that door open. When I placed her, I had to sign a piece of paper that asked, when she turns 18, can she have your information? And since it was open, she had my information all along, but that's something you can do in a closed adoption. The first mom can sign a piece of paper that when the child's 18, they can seek the birth mom out. And there's some women that absolutely don't want to have contact with that child.
Well, and so thank you for explaining that a little bit. And so for your situation, if I can follow along, is that this was an open adoption. And so the agreement that you had with, and I'm going to get these terms wrong, I know I am, is it the first mom? Is that the one who adopted?
I'm the mom. I'm the first mom.
I'm just going to say, because this isn't my brain, if you don't mind, adoptive
Sure.
mom, birth mom, because I don't want to get that mixed up.
Sure.
So in your situation, it was agreed upon by you and the adopted mom that you would have these visitations with the child throughout the first year and then beyond a couple times a year. And that was at the adopted parents' discretion, basically.
Yes.
Okay. So my first question, and again, this is, I'm being as sensitive as I can. I can imagine when I had to tell, and again, this doesn't hold a candle, doesn't even hold a candle to the adoption conversation. But I remember when my kids were little and we had to tell them certain things, there were some age-appropriate discussions we would have to have, and there would be some non-age-appropriate discussions we would have to wait. That's not the right time to talk to our kids. I can only imagine that adoption kind of falls into that. So my first question is, do you think it was easier or harder on your child if that conversation, if they grew up having that information and just always being part of the conversation? Or do you think it would be more of an age-appropriate discussion to have later? I'm trying to understand what would be kind of the best thing for the child that's had to go through that, because I'm so removed from it.
A child should never remember being told that they're adopted. It should be the day they're home from the hospital. Picture on the wall, a teddy bear or memento that the first mom, birth mom gave them. That conversation should start before the child even has verbal skills. It makes an impression on an adoptee. I have read when they find out they're adopted, it's crushing. Their whole world that they thought they knew is blown away because this is not my biological mom and dad. There are some adoptive parents that like to pretend like as if born to, and research has shown that that's not ideal. Something that I did not know, but I learned my daughter has an original birth certificate that has my name on it as parent. When she is adopted, the state issues a new birth certificate that shows the parents being the adoptive parents. So it shows, even though they were 3 hours away, she was born at this time at this hospital, which is where I live, with mom and dad's name on it. There's no indication on the birth certificate at all that this child was born to another woman.
I was in Florida giving birth to one of mine, and then back in my own state 2 months later doing the other one, I guess. But it's an interesting, that was really shocking to me too. I remember when our adoptions took place that was different. Well, and mine were, my kids were both, what were they, 5? I think both of them were 5 when our adoption was completed. But I'll be honest, Lisa, there was a time before I went the foster care route, and I didn't intend to be a foster parent. I intended to adopt. Like, I intended to foster with the plan of adoption, which meant that we had planned to only have placement of children who were already free for adoption, right? Well, I don't know if it's like this in every state, but our state doesn't seem to do much of that. I mean, there's kids that are they're ready for adoption, but they don't I don't know. It's not like the state calls and says, "Oh, we have a FOS adopt family. Let's call them." It's really bizarre. So they called us for foster placements after foster placement after foster placement. Before we went down that road, though, I had looked into the same agency, and we had talked about going down that road for adoption to try and go through that specific agency. And I remember calling just for some information that first time, and they told me all of our adoptions are open. And I have to give a little disclaimer. I was like 20 nothing. And when they said that, I was like, well, what does that even mean? And when they explained it, I had a massive amount of fear in that. There was a huge amount of insecurity in that for me, not understanding. I don't even think my brain was done developing at the time, but not understanding any of that. And then like, I have to have like these people in my life forever. And that was just not really an option for me. But I'll be even more honest and tell you that at probably 24, 25 years old, I wouldn't have cared. I probably would have done it anyway had we not decided to go a different direction. And I'm super grateful that we didn't go that way because I wasn't ready for something like that. I wasn't ready to be open to that. And I just wonder how many families do go through that process and they're like, oh no, every adoption we do has to be open. And people are like, well, I don't really want that, but I want a baby.
Yes.
So let me have the baby, right? And then change their boundaries to fit around that. And then they're either not educated about it or they don't understand it or whatever. And then that becomes an issue later. And so I wonder how many families that really happens to. I imagine a lot of moms, birth moms must experience that because I think when you're in that space and you find out you can't have your own kids, you will do anything to have a family if that's what you want, you know? Malin, you look like you're ready to say something. I can't decide.
Well, again, I hear this conversation, and one of the things that starts nagging at me, and I guess I put myself, I think it's easier for me, and I understand there's a variety of reasons and circumstances that happen to why somebody would want to put their child up for adoption. But for whatever reason, I seem to kind of gravitate and maybe understand the side of the adoptive parents. And even though it's an open adoption, I would think if I put myself in that space, I would still want to be able to have the autonomy to say, when do I get to share this information? When do I get to decide when it's the appropriate time for, my child that I'm adopting for them to be able to hear this information? And when I go through it, I think circumstances play a lot, right? Like to how the child ends up being even, ready to be adopted or in the adoption status, I think would have a lot that would impact that decision for me. But even when I'm hearing both of you guys talk, the first thing that comes to my mind is, but isn't that taking away some of the parental authority and rights these adoptive parents have, even in the discussions around what we're having right now? And I know there's a lot of factors to that, but Lisa, I kind of wanted to get your opinion on that. Like, do you think that limits or that starts reducing some of that parental authority that these adoptive parents start getting or should have?
Adoptive parents are raising somebody else's child. They have a legal piece of paper that says it's their child, but that child was born to another person, and that person should be absorbed into the family. I understand what you're saying, but it's about what's best for the child. And books and research and science shows that connection. Most adoptive parents, if they're not adoptees, don't understand what it's like to look in the mirror and not have anybody in their circle resemble. And family trees are severed through adoption. But not to be morbid, but 100 years down the road, if they find a body and do DNA, authorities are going to say, hey, this child matched your DNA, not the adoptive parents' DNA. So the child belongs to both the first family, the birth family, and the adoptive family. And there's so many other parenting decisions that the adoptive family gets to make, what school they go to, what religion they are, how they cut their hair, stuff like that. But part of adoption is understanding that there's another family that belongs to that belongs to the child.
Well, and I do think what's interesting, and one thing that I've had to kind of stretch outside of my own perspective to think about is how heavily our society really places, I don't know, a halo on adoptive parents and takes the halo away from birth parents. And how, it's like you automatically assume if a child's placed for adoption that it's a 16-year-old kid or a drug addict or, whatever the case might be. It's never a super positive thing. Very, very rarely is that a super positive thing. And I think that's one of the reasons that hearing you talk about this has been so fascinating for me, because I even have some of that own thinking, some of those biases, I guess, just underlying thoughts or beliefs. And I'm sure that comes from movies. I'm sure that comes from old ideas about adoption, because it really wasn't as accessible probably 50, 60 years ago. But what's interesting to me about what you're saying is that one of the things I do hear a lot is, oh, a birth mother is so selfless, so selfless. And the truth of the matter is that us adoptive parents need to be selfless too. And that doesn't always play out that way. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from what you're saying. So
the adoptive family pays the agency or, oh God, a facilitator, and let's lay it out, buys the child. The birth mom doesn't get any of that money. She might get her hospital bills paid. She might get maternity clothes or rent or food. But a $35,000, $100,000 adoption fee goes to the agency. So the agency is making money by placing a child. If that birth mom got $5,000, Jamie, in your day job, you would understand if that family got $5,000, $10,000, that changed their life. And it might change the trajectory of if they choose adoption or not. There's that stereotype 16-year-old drug addict that got pregnant and now has to place. A lot of coercion goes on in adoption. A lot of the agency, the parents, religion, circumstances, addiction. People get clean. If you're 25 years old, you get pregnant and you're deep in your addiction, you might be a completely different person at 30 years old, but you've already lost your child.
Okay, so I hear that. I really do. What I'm struggling with, though, is, and I don't think you're saying this, but this is how I'm trying to process it, Lisa. You're not suggesting that adoption be even temporary, right? Like, you're not saying that a child being placed with a family through adoption would then have the opportunity to be returned back to the birth family or the birth mother. That's kind of what I'm hearing from you a little bit, but that's not what you're saying. So I will make sure I'm hearing what you say. Like, you're not expecting adopted children who get placed with a family who they've now adopted this child to then, because the birth mom, for whatever the circumstances have changed, life is cleaned up, whatever it is, would then be able to go back with the birth mother.
No, I'm saying offer the birth mom resources at the time of pregnancy to prevent the adoption. Also, kinship adoption, where that child is placed within the family of origin. Or I wanted a legal guardianship, and the agency is like, we don't do that. So that would keep her name and biology for roots in place. If it was a legal guardianship, it wouldn't change her name on the birth certificate. But I'm saying let's do preventative to not avoid adoption, but make parenting the first and most attainable option. Adoptees do get rehomed. I know of one case that a child was rehomed back to the birth mom, but a lot of times, like on Facebook, there's a dark side of Facebook where you can, quote unquote, advertise your child and have another family adopt them because they're too much. They don't fit in with the new biological children. There is a dirty, dark side to adoption too. And that's not the norm, but it does happen.
Right. I will say though, maybe I've been a little bit naive, just because in my mind, I would think that all of these circumstances that you're just suggesting, right? Like, hey, we have a guardianship, or maybe somebody in the family would take the child. In my mind, I guess I've always assumed every single avenue had already been, looked at and was crossed off, and adoption was the last option for them because they just couldn't, for whatever reason, raise this child, or they didn't think the lifestyle that they could provide this child would be adequate enough. They wanted a better life. I think this is the halo effect Jamie was talking about, right? Like, you just want a better life, and you've looked at all your avenues, and there's just nothing that's going on that would work. And so adoption is the last resort. And you're kind of making me look at that a little bit different, to say maybe there are options that aren't available that birth parents could go down to maybe help keep their child instead of going into adoption. And I have to say, I've always assumed those bridges would have been crossed before you even went to an adoption agencies, to be quite honest. So that's something I'm looking at this for the first time a little bit different.
A lot of teenage young women who live at home and find themselves pregnant, their parents tell them, you place the child or you're out on the streets. So she goes to the agency, and the agency is like, okay, well, let's make an adoption plan. Instead of offering, if we paid the first 3 months of your rent, would that help? Or, if we help buy baby supplies, what do you need to parent this child? The agency is not going to ask that, because they don't make money if you keep your child.
Well, and that's something too. And I mean, I don't know, this might really show my age, but back when like 16 and Pregnant was first on, one of the couples chose adoption for their baby. And what's been interesting to me is now, I don't know however many teen years later this is, watching them tell their story about that now, and then going back and rewatching some of those clips, that has been pretty enlightening to me. And I don't know how many adoption agencies we have in our state. The one that I know of, I was under the understanding it was a free adoption. So I'm surprised to hear that there's fees, because back when I had looked into it, there was no fees. They expected you to donate over the years afterwards, but they didn't charge anything at the time. But it is interesting to think about, because that is so outside of my experience. It's interesting to think about an agency that's collecting money to do this. And does the consultants get a commission? Is that why some of those conversations on that television show happened the way they did? Because they did feel pretty coercive. At the time, it didn't feel that way at all. When I was young and watching it, it was like, oh, wow, look at what an amazing sacrifice these two young people are making for their baby. And then you go back and look at it with a whole different set of eyes, and it does feel really coercive. Do you have any idea what the numbers are as far as for-profit agencies and things like that? Is that pretty much what we have available to us?
Even the agency that you spoke to, at that time, it was a free adoption. They ask that you keep them in mind as you make your Christmas donation. That agency now charges $35,000 to place it. And that's probably been in the last 5 years that changed. And they didn't have to tell me that there was no fee, but that's not something that comes up nationwide. They don't tell birth moms what the fee is. But, there's a home study fee of $5,000, $7,000. And then, there's a medical fee, because, this mom is going to have hospital bills. So the adoptive parents have to pay a medical fee. In my case, I was on insurance. It cost me less than $100 to have my baby. And I had to nudge the agency to even pay that fee. So and nationwide, the agency that you spoke to was a rarity. That's not, and they don't even do that anymore. They do charge a fee now. And there's agencies that you could place through, there's attorneys, and then there's facilitators. That facilitators that's pure profit, what they're making. surf the internet, put ads out to get birth moms. Are you in a pregnancy crisis? Contact us. And then that facilitator works with different agencies to connect the birth mom with the agency. And then there's a facilitator fee, and it's crazy expensive. But desperate couples will do that. I mean, that's how bad they want a baby. There is not a price tag for how bad they want a baby.
Yeah.
So again, I feel like I'm like, but what about this? So as an outsider looking in, and this is a horrible analogy, I understand. So all of our listeners, please know that what I'm about to say is cringeworthy, but it's the best thing I could come up with as I'm trying to relate. But I kind of see, and I know that humans are way more important than animals. But this is the only thing I have to relate it to. When you go and adopt a pet from a shelter, you have to pay these fees. You have to pay all of these things. And I asked one time, I asked the shelter, I'm like, why are there all these fees? You have these animals. You want to give these animals good home. We're here. We have all the criteria. And they said that at one point in time, their shelter, at least the one I went to, it was free. They got all of their money came from donations. So adopting animals were completely free. And they said the number of times that they would see these animals back on the streets or coming back into their facility when people didn't have to put down money was astronomical. And I forget exactly what they said the percentage was, but I know it was really high. And they said when they implemented charging a fee, it almost brought that down to zero. It still happens. There's still occasions, kind of like what you said. There's circumstances. But what they kind of attributed to is you are now putting skin in the game. You are now doing some sort of investment into this animal. Now I'm going to sidestep to adoption, which I know it's a horrible analogy, but now you go to adoption, I kind of almost expect there to be fees because of how much more important humans are than animals. And I would want serious people. I would want people that can provide a certain lifestyle. And I would want somebody that is really thinking through this process. I wouldn't want there to be somebody that says, oh, adoption is completely free. I'll try out being a parent. And guess what? If it doesn't work out, we'll just drop them back off. No harm, no foul. So in my brain, as I'm trying to piece these pieces together, I mean, am I sitting here saying they make too much money? I'm not qualified. I've never been through the process, as I stated, but I can kind of rationalize why those fees are there in order to make sure the family can provide. Because as of being a parent myself, I had no children one day. We went to the hospital, came home the next day with a baby, and the expenses just started going. And, you try to prepare for yourself, but you can't. The second and third child, yes, I was a lot more prepared. But if I had to go to a hospital to say, okay, prove that I am able to take care of this kid and I am financially, responsible, and I could see them almost asking me, well, can you prove it a little bit? I think the benefit that birth parents get is we don't have to have that proof, right? Nature takes care of that for us. But when you get a chance to place a child into a family, I kind of see those fees as a way to kind of validate this is a family that is going to be able to meet some of the child's most basic needs. And that's very important. So maybe I'm thinking of it wrong. And I know I used the wrong analogy, but that's how my brain kind of puts those pieces together. If they make too much money in their fees, I think that's a whole nother conversation. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I was going to say, I know home studies don't have to cost $5,000. Mine was free. When I did foster adoption, it was free. I also know that I did not have to pay any fees. My legal fees were also paid for our adoption, but we're talking about grown kids that are being adopted, not babies. And I personally, I think I have seen some huge discrepancies in between those two things. You said something that the first time I heard it totally heckled me, like essentially babies for sale, right? Because it feels yucky and that doesn't feel good. But what's interesting is that infants are, but older kids that are stuck in the system because of whatever circumstances took them there, they're not, it's different. And to me, that's a pretty eye-opening thing. But I don't know what your thoughts are, Lisa, but
domestic infant adoption. Everybody wants a wet womb infant. And by putting fees, exorbitant fees crazy fees on these children. Only the wealthy are going to be able to adopt. And that's associating money with and privilege to raise a child. And that's not, money doesn't equal a happy childhood. In fact, you pay enough for a baby, you feel entitled. And I mean, that's a lot of the reason why the birth family gets cut out. Like, we paid a lot of money for this child. This is our child. And, it's the better than, I placed my child so she would have a better life. Well, adoptive parents, you better have a better job than me. You better have a better house than me. You better take better vacations. You better, you better be a better human. And in my case, that's not true. They're no better than me, but they think they are.
Yeah. Well, that's what's fascinating to me is how we got some of these, I guess, I don't know, stereotypical beliefs in society. Because I do think that some of that really is fundamental to our belief system. I will tell you, one of the things that I have cringed at for myself is this idea that I'm some sort of a saint because I rescued babies or something like that. And it's something that I get all the time. Like, these are my kids, and you can look at my children and know that they are not biologically mine, and they aren't biologically siblings, and they're the same age with 2 months separation, right? So clearly some adoption happened here. And how often I get, "Oh, that's just so great of you. You're so amazing." And I'm like, no, I'm just trying to make it like everybody else. It's fine. But where do you think, and how do you think, I guess, is the best way to start dispelling some of those things, some of those, what seems to be just in our society, things like, oh, well, and I guess another thought is that the adoptees are privileged because they were adopted. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's some sense that, oh, you're so lucky you were adopted, and this perpetuated belief system in that. What is the best way to start dispelling some of that? Like, how have you seen some of that change, and how can we be part of that?
Education. There's some good books out. There's some good movies out. And somebody reads a book or watches a movie and there's like something uncomfortable that they come across. If they just sit in that and ask themselves, why does that make me uncomfortable? If you ask an adoptee, I don't think they feel lucky that they were taken away from their original family. They have a good life. Most of them have a good life. But you listen to the adoptees and, an adoptee will say something on social media and then somebody will chime up. Not all. Well, of course not all. They're just speaking their experience. So just listening to adoptees and, letting adoptees guide the ship with contact with the family of origin, contact with extended adopted family. There's some statistics out there. An adopted child is 4 times likely to complete suicide. There's mental health issues that need to be talked about. The adoptive family needs to be aware that they're at higher risk. Sexual assault by a non-biological parent is more prevalent in adoptive families. So just reading statistics, educating yourself, there's agencies that charge more for Caucasian babies than they do for mixed race or Black children. If you're adopting a Black child, the first Black person in your house shouldn't be the baby you adopt. So just education. They're not blank slates. We used to believe that babies were blank slates. You could just take them home and love them and everything's fine. No big deal that they grew in somebody else's tummy and that heartbeat and that smell and that sound. The baby forgets all. They don't. There's science that shows that it's a trauma to be separated from the mother at birth.
Well, and it's interesting. It's interesting that you say that, because I think if there is one thing that I wish there was some sort of requirement for, is that there was some intensive training about adoption. I mean, I had been through lots of trainings that were required to stay licensed as a foster parent. And I focused a couple of those around adoption, but they were super surfacey. And there are things that I didn't even think of. I didn't even consider. And the day we adopted my daughter, the judge said, this is for life, right? You can't bring her back at 16. And we all laughed and thought that was funny because she was 5. And then at 16, I'm like, okay, this is why he said that, I didn't get it. And not that, I think it's not even like the parenting aspects of it as much as it is like some of those cultural things. I didn't understand what parenting multiculturally would look like or should look like or what the different perspective might be for me. I didn't understand like the birth family connection. And there are times now when I can look at both of my kids and I see traits of their birth families in them when they say something a certain way. And I'm like, okay, I've never heard anybody say it except for your birth mom. There are pieces of them that are there forever. I'm super grateful that along the way, I had some good mentors that really did help me understand the importance and the value in honoring their heritage, in honoring their birth family and making sure that that we held a space for that in our home and in our conversation. And when we were able to, by having visits and things like that, I don't know that I did an amazing job, but I was definitely intentional about it and tried really hard to make sure that we could do that as much as we could, given the circumstances that we had. And that is something I guess I hope anyone who's looking at adoption is considering. It's not take the baby home and love the baby. That's the easy part. The hard part is all of the other stuff and making sure. And I guess from experience, I can also say keeping my own feelings out of it, right? Like doing what's best for my children and not what I feel I need or what's best for me. That is probably the piece that I needed. That's why I needed the mentors. That's why I needed the people around me who could say, hey, Jamie, like, have you considered? Because I hadn't thought that far. So
I was going to say, it's interesting that you say that, Jamie, because there's no difference between, from my point of view, there's no difference between, I'll say, adoptive parents and birth parents, because everything you just said, trauma is going to happen. I mean, there's things that I've done to my children intentionally and unintentionally that will have caused trauma. There's family members in my kids' life that I know, in fact, have caused trauma. There's great joy that has come from, mentors around me. And I've had mentors that I've had to listen to because I'm raising this child. I don't know what I'm doing. I mentioned earlier, I walked into a hospital, a husband. 12 hours later, I walked out a father and a husband. And I joked when, my first child was born, I joked with the nurses and said, okay, where's the instruction manual? And they looked right at me, just dead face. And they said, there is no instruction manual. I'm like, okay, I just needed I needed to lighten the mood here. But everything you just said, Jamie, I'm hitting my ear and I'm like, check, check, check on both sides of the equation. Like that's, to me, what you just described. If I didn't know we were talking, about adoption, I could apply that same thing to our experience. And so in my point to all of this coming back is one of the things that I kind of go to and why I think adoptive, parents are superheroes and why I think people that give their children up for adoption are superheroes is because I don't care what the circumstances are. And again, I know I'm removed, but I don't care what the circumstances are. There's a sacrifice. There's a sacrifice on both sides of it. And that's what parenting is. Parenting is a sacrifice. Regardless if it came out of your own body or if you went to an agency and got a child, sacrifices are happening on both sides of the equation. And so what's hard for me in this space where I'm at is to look across both sides and say, well, and nobody here asked me to do this, but as we're talking about adoption, like, okay, so where do you start? Where do you fix the problem? Air quotes, problem, right? Like, who do you go to? Because you have people that for whatever reason are giving their kids up for adoption, which you have to, at least for me, I try the best I can to say this is what they feel is best for their children. And then you have other people coming on the side saying, I want to love a child, because adoption to me takes great love. Can that love be warped? Yeah, but so can it. It can also be warped by biological parents, right? Like you talked about molestation with adoptive parents or adoptive families. I'm sure that is a higher number, but it also happens with biological kids. And so when I look across this table and I kind of hear us talking, I'm thinking, but really, what's the difference? The difference is both parties are trying to give the best life, either that's economic or that's financially or that's emotionally. But I didn't hear a difference when you said that. And it kind of made me chuckle, Jamie, because I'm like, check, 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 check. That's being a parent. That is absolutely being a parent. And so my question to the group is, should adoptive parents then be looked at differently than somebody who's had the child biologically? And I don't think so. And I don't think either one of you are saying that either, but it just made me want to pause and go, that's very interesting that they're so similar and they have the same motives, typically.
Yeah, I'll let you respond to that question, Lisa, because I think you have some good insight in that. How do we change that? What should be different? How can we make this better?
An adopted child, every adoption starts with trauma. And acknowledging that trauma for the child is key, and keeping things child focused. I mean, adoption has went from finding a home to a child to finding a child for the home. Adopting out of foster care. I mean, those children obviously are not safe in the environment that they came from. They need permanency. My experience is with domestic infant adoption, and I see the coercion. I was coerced. I read my adoption chart, 10 out of 10, don't recommend. I see how, my hospital stay that I wanted to be just me, my HIPAA was violated by my caseworker. I had a hospital plan. I told the adoptive parents what my hospital plan was. I breastfed. I took my child home for a couple days. 18 months later, I was told, we didn't like that you breastfed. We didn't like your hospital plan. Your mom is not her grandma. I'm like, why didn't you just say that at the time? Or was this just a baby grab? And in my case, it was a baby grab. They would have said and done anything to get the child. And then they lose focus that the child needs to be the center of the adoption, and they make it about themselves.
Yeah. I do love the idea of trying to offer more supports at the time of pregnancy. That is, because I do see that in my work. I see a lot of families that are struggling, and how are we going to manage this? How are we going to add this to what we're working through, or cope with the stress of being alone while doing it, or, all of the things that come. I can say adoption was part of the conversation with my kids from the time they came, from the time we knew that it was going to end up with adoption. And you're right. There has to be conversation around that. There has to be conversation with the child around that. And I don't know. I've thought like psychological screening for adoptive parents. I've thought, all of those things. I also think one of the most eye-opening things for me has been listening to adoptees, listening to kids who have been adopted as adults talk about their experiences, talk about feeling like their whole life was a lie, like they just fell out of the sky and they don't have any roots or origin because everything they thought was true turned out to be not true. Those kind of things are really, really eye-opening for me to listen to those things. Did it hurt? Yeah, it didn't always feel very nice. It didn't always give me the warm and fuzzies, but it's been so good for me to listen to those too. So yeah, I just have to tell you, I'm curious because this is kind of the stage that I'm in now, the after, right? When a kid turns 18 and they start having their own choices, that's the space that I live in now. So I'm curious, how do you move forward after that? Because it sounds like you don't think there's going to be any options for conversation or connection before that. How are you planning for that? What do you hope happens when your child turns 18? What are your next steps in that?
I hope I get at least an hour with her just to tell my side of the story, because I don't know if she hears positive things about me. I call every Sunday, and she has a cell phone, but I'm not allowed to call her on her cell phone. I have to call mom or dad, and then I leave a message. They call me back when they want. She calls me, but her mom puts her on speakerphone to monitor what I say. Not that I've ever said anything other than I want to see you. And that's a hot topic. Adoptive mom says I'm not allowed to ask her, my child, one-to-one, if I can see her. I have to text or call the adoptive parents. When she turns 18, I hope I get at least an hour with her to dispel any myth, to tell her about the other side of her family, because her family looks different than adoptive mom and dad's family. And let her lead the way, let her decide contact, and hopefully adoptive mom and dad give her space to make those decisions, if she wants to have a relationship with me or not. Some adoptive parents threaten to cut off the adult adoptee. If you talk to her, if she's at your wedding, it happens.
My God.
It's just,
I'm sorry. I didn't even think of that. Like,
yeah, there is some adoptive parents that are just so controlling. Like, you're 21 and going to college. If you speak to that other family, then we're not paying for your college anymore. You got to give your car back. We're not paying for your cell phone. So they control the adoptee, even though the adoptee is an adult. And, 21 years old, 20 years old going to college, they can't just move out. And think of a good person. But I will let her lead the way. If she, tells me to pound sand after that hour, that it's her choice. She's leading the way. She'll always have my phone number. I'll never block her. Just let her guide the way with me and with her adopted family. Let her make the decision.
Well, and I can tell you, I think what makes your story so interesting to me is that I know you, and I adore your adult daughter. She is one of my favorite people on the planet. And one of the things that her and I always talked about, like how great of a mom you were for her and how you supported her in so many ways. And so to me, I could look at this situation from the outside and say, wait a minute, no, this is a different situation. This is a different birth mom. This is a different story here. And so, part of me is really sad that that's happened that way because I know you, and I know that you just want what's best for your other child. And so I'm sorry this has come the way it has, because that's just really, I don't know. I wish it could be different. And I do appreciate you sharing your story with us today. That's it's a lot, but I appreciate that.
80% of open adoptions close by the time the child is 5 years. Some people don't understand that.
I have wondered what that is. And a part of me, because there was a space and time where not there was. I think this happens even now. Even though I'm aware of it and even though I'm super intentional about it, there are still spaces now that as an adoptive parent, I feel insecurity. I feel like have I done enough to make sure they know how much I love them? Because that connection, that biological connection, can be so deep. And for my kids, they were part of their biological families for several years before they came to my house. So I think that added a layer for me. But this insecurity that comes from, I'm always second mom, and can they love me and them? Even though I love both of my kids the same, right? Like, I have love for both of them, but how could they possibly love both of us, right? It's like some weird thing. And I wish that was not a thing. And I wish I had learned to understand that and cope with that sooner, because I think that would have just made things easier from a long time ago. But it is a difficult space to be. And I think that is a really telling sign, because I think the older the kids get, it probably is harder because they start becoming autonomous and they get to start making their own choices and ask questions, and all of those things would get harder about that time. But at the same time, you agreed to this. Follow through with it. That's so heartbreaking. And not just heartbreaking for you as a birth mom, but heartbreaking for the kids too. Because I think that's That's the part. At 20 years old, my kids still have questions. They still ask me questions. And the way I answer them plays a big role in how they feel about things and how they move forward. And I think that's important to remember in these situations. So
Yeah, love's not a pie. I mean, there's enough love to go around. It's not a pie.
why do we feel that way? I don't understand.
So I have a question that, do you think with technology that closed adoptions will be a thing in the past?
I don't, because of commercial and personal DNA. Any adoptive parents that aren't telling their kid that they're adopted is doing a disservice to their child, because you spit in a tube and you get the results back and you're like, whoa. So there's absolutely no benefit in telling the child that they're not adopted. And, you get the, but what if, even if mom and dad are in prison, or they're horrible people, that child is still biologically related to that person. And talking derogatory towards their flesh and blood does a disservice. So openness is 100% the best way to go.
Well, and that's what I was talking about. Like, to me, you can go through a closed adoption, but with today's technology, I mean, you spit in a tube. If I for whatever reason had to give a child up for adoption and it was closed, that would have been one of the first things that I've done, because I'm finding family members I didn't even know existed going through the same thing. I'm also, putting my DNA in databases that help solve crimes. So as I was hearing you guys talk, I'm thinking, we have technology now. I mean, even if an adoptive family wanted to keep it a secret or they close the adoption, you can put your DNA out there and find out a whole side of your family. And with today's technology, it's not very hard. So again, as this becomes more and more accessible, to me, the question is, okay, you can go down a closed adoption, but what does that really mean anymore? Because it's almost, once a child has access to technology and has access to enough money that they could put their DNA out there, doesn't matter what the legal document says, doesn't matter what the adoptive parent says, doesn't matter what that circumstance was at the time that they were adopted. All of that gets negated because there's now an avenue over here for people to find and connect with their biological family. And, that's not me discounting adoption. I'm just asking the question, is a closed adoption going to be a thing of the past? Because frankly, you can't keep them closed anymore.
Well, and in my experience, the less access there is, the more drive there is to find out for, especially when they start to get like teenaged. If any knowledge, information, or access has been denied, that drive is huge to see, who is this person? How do I connect with them? Especially when you've got parents on one side putting down rules and boundaries, and maybe the grass is greener on the other side. I think that's probably, I've talked with a few adoptees that I know, and that is the time that they start seeking. So but I don't know that unless some of the system changes, I don't know that that's going to change. I don't know. What do you think, Lisa? If adoptive parents aren't educated and learn to deal with these things from the beginning, I don't know if that closed adoption idea will ever change.
I think more agencies are pushing for openness, just because, right now in the last 3 years, there's just been some voices out on social media that is just blowing up and shining a light on adoptees. As long as there's transactional adoption, there's going to be adoptive parents that want to keep a secret and act as if. But I think you're going to see less and less closed adoptions. And what child would not be extremely upset if they found out 18 years later that everything that they thought they knew was built on lies? There's no advantage to the adoptive parent to keep that secret.
Well, I think there's also a difference between letting your adoptive children know they're adopted and also letting them have, a connection or a relationship with the birth mom or the birth family too. Like, even in this conversation, and I hear and appreciate your story, Lisa, and your point of view, and Jamie, I know your story, and so I'm kind of balancing the two of these together. And I'm still in the camp of, it's kind of the adoptive parents' decision, right? Like, they don't have to, they can tell their child, you were adopted, and maybe those details come out later. But so in my mind, before I just ramble on more, in my mind, there's two things. I think having no awareness as a child that was adopted, having no awareness I was adopted is one thing, but knowing that I am adopted, but my parents love me who adopted me, but maybe I don't know the depth of details from my birth family. Maybe that's a different story, right? Maybe that's the element. So in my mind, I'm thinking I don't see a reason why adoptive parents don't tell their children that they're adopted, but maybe they don't tell the full story of the birth family or the birth mom until later. In my brain, that kind of sits logical in my brain for whatever reason. So I kind of still see it as two separate conversations.
What would be the benefit to the child to not know the details?
Well, and again, this is all so situational, right? But let's say it's a mom who, maybe didn't want their child and said, for whatever reason, said, I'm not ready to be a mom. I don't want to be a mom. I never meant, I was high on drugs, or this wasn't the right time in my life. As a child, I can't imagine those kinds of circumstances being an uplift to them. It's going to be a hard road to walk anyways, but maybe there's a point in time when the child's older that they can start hearing that. And again, it's all circumstantial and situational, right? Because there are stories where it is a selfless giving that the birth mom had to do, and this was the best life that they could try to give their child. And that could be a little bit different, where that story might be, you're adopted, but just know your birth mom did the best she could for you, and she wanted you to have this life because she thought it was better. So it's just circumstantial. But if I had to walk this line, I would say, in my opinion, it's never okay to not let your kids know kind of, hey, this adoption, you were adopted. And I say this so coldly, like matter of factly, there's probably a variety of ways of how this could be talked to a child, and through sensitivity and love. And, you don't just be like, oh, by the way, you've been adopted. But I think the circumstances of why that adoption happened would be later. The question that bubbles out of me, Lisa, is once you have that conversation, the next question I would assume a child would have is, well, who are they? And why did they let me go? And if you just tell one side of the story, as I'm thinking through this, and leave the other side of the story untold, I don't know if that gives, the child any more sense of comfort.
So in your scenario, the child would hear the narrative of why they were placed through the adoptive parent's eyes, when maybe that mama was coerced. Maybe there's more to the story. So let's say I adopt a child. It was a sensitive story. There's some hurt involved. I would still want me as an adult, as the adoptive parent, have a relationship with the birth family, because maybe as it filtered through the storyline, some details got missed. So as an adoptive parent, if the person decides, this has to be age appropriate information. Number one, kids are pretty smart. And so I would still want the adoptive parents and the birth family to have an open relationship, get to know that family, because when the child turns 18 or becomes an adult, they're all the adopted child's family. So I would be, as an adoptive parent, I would be hesitant to tell the story as I heard from the agency, rather than hearing it from the birth family.
Well, and that was going to be my question, is how many of these or adopted families even hear the right story or know the story? And so if I don't have confidence, I'm trying to put myself again in a place where I've never been, but as a logical thinker, that if I was going to adopt a child and I wasn't sure if I knew the whole story, as a parent, one of the natural instincts that kick in is I want to protect my child from harm. And as an adult with an adoptive child, I can't see that being any different, right? I can't see an adoptive parent being like, I don't care if they're safe or not. I'm going to tell them the truth at any cost. So I would almost say there would be nothing, like maybe that's why I'm speculating now, but maybe that's why a lot of adoptive parents choose to maybe not speak or completely omit the fact, because what would they say? Because maybe the information they received, it's a horrible experience, right? Like your mom, when are you going to tell a child, yeah, your mom really didn't want you. They wanted to live a better life, or your mom was so full of drugs that she chose that lifestyle before loving you. And I say that harshly for a reason, because I don't know how gently you say that to a child. Will they really even hear it? They just will, or all they going to hear is your biological mom didn't want you. And as an adoptive parent, maybe it's better to protect the child to say, let's, for as long as we can, right, wrong, or indifferent, let's omit those facts for a while, because let's just let you have a childhood. Let's just let you grow up. Let you just feel what love is. And then we'll deal with this as you get older and start asking some of these questions. I'm speculating, but that's the best I got.
One of the things, conversations I had with my kids a lot was that I would tell them what I felt was age appropriate at the time. And after I figured out that my perspective wasn't everything, I made sure that they understood that this is what I understand happened. And this is what I was told happened. But your mom has a whole different understanding of what happened for her. And I don't know what that is. And thankfully, because of the work that I do, I've been able to work with parents on the other side of the table with them and understand that no, they are no different than me in loving their kids. You know what I mean? And they are doing the very best that they can. And that has really changed my perspective, even in working with the bio families of my own kids. And so I think we have to give them, I think we have to give the adoptees the benefit of the fact that we don't know for sure if there's not that contact. But I also, I really think that you said it, our kids are smart. These kids are smart. Kids are intelligent. And at the end of the day, I am watching my kids figure this out. I'm watching them navigate as adults, biological family, adoptive extended family. There's a lot of family. And they're figuring out who their people are. And one of the therapists that I have worked with in the past told me once, he said that kids in between 18 and 25, often they go and they explore it all. They go and experience all of the things, and then they go back to where they feel comfortable. They go to the space where they feel like they fit the best. And, as an adoptive parent, my goal is to leave that door open and let them figure out what's best for them, and know that they know that that door is open and they can come anytime they need to, that I'm here for them and support them in doing that. And so after the 18 thing, Lisa, I'm really hopeful that is a great space for you to make some good connections and build some relationship. Is that soon? Do you want to share how soon that is?
It's 2.5 more years.
2.5 more years. Yeah, good. Now, you had said you had some good resources, some things that maybe our listeners might be interested in if they want to learn more about this topic and things related to adoption and the trauma around adoption. Do you want to share some of those resources?
A couple books that I recommend, Relinquished by Gretchen, Sisson, and Adoption Unfiltered is a book written by an adoptive parent, an adoptee, and birth mom. Adoption Unfiltered. And then social media, there's a list. I will send that to you. Psychotherapist Amy, Therapy Redeemed, Adoption Truth, Rewriting Adoption, Adoptive Healing Collective. And from the first mom perspective, Big Tough Girl does a lot of work changing laws, and that she is a first mom of an adult child. Just listen to the adoptee voice. They absolutely are the expert. They all have a different story, and they're all valid.
We'll definitely list those on our show notes for this episode. So if any of you are interested in exploring any of those, that would be great. I know I'm interested in reading some of those books, both of those books, so I will be looking into those. So again, I just want to say thanks for bringing your perspective and sharing that. And quite frankly, I'll just be super honest and say for sharing that with me a couple of years ago, because it really has been a space for growth and learning for me too. And I appreciate that. So thank you. And again, I hope the next couple of years you'll get some good space and open some new doors for you. So
Thank you.
And Lisa, I want to thank you because I know I don't have any skin in the game here in this conversation. And I hope I did a good job kind of being respectful as much as I can be. You did give me a different perspective and a lens to kind of look at adoption because, again, I put adoption on a pedestal. I put people who adopt on a pedestal. And I try to look at the people that have to give their children up for adoption as a sacrifice. And maybe that's me just only looking through the positive lens. And I never, before this conversation, even Jamie suggested this topic. I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. What do you mean trauma from adoption? There's nothing but positive from adoption. And I can tell in the short time that we've had a chance to talk, there's a different perspective. Now, is it the absolute truth? No. And I don't think you're proclaiming that. But there was a viewpoint here that I was ignoring and I wasn't seeing it. So if nothing else, just know that this conversation helped me recognize that there's something there. And I have to be mindful of it. So for that, I say thank you because I love looking at the world with different lenses and different perspectives. And this is one that I didn't have until we had this conversation. So thank you for coming on. And quite honestly, having probably the most difficult conversation is for you and Jamie going through this process and being so candid and open. And I know some of this was emotionally raw, probably hit a couple nerves. And for all that, I just want to recognize and say thank you because it really did mean something for me to be able to sit and have these conversations and ask these questions. So thank you.
I appreciate both of you listening and opening your mind to different perspectives.
Well, yours is a good one. So, and I haven't seen you in a while, so it's kind of fun to have you on. So I appreciate that too. So, all right. Well, we just want to say thank you for taking time to listen to this episode of Roundtable Mindset. We appreciate you. And hope you'll join us again around the roundtable.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.